Hello, and welcome back to the channel. And also welcome back to the P-61. As you recall, we did the black night fighter side, and we followed that up with the upper surfaces of olive drab on this rather two-face model, which has proven to be a nice way to do demonstrations of this nature on. The Hobby Boss kit provides good enough surface detailing for us to really extrapolate out some worthwhile information, particularly for kind of that conversation and transition of, you know, what is oil paint rendering and how do you weather, in these kind of fundamental conversations that we can have using this project, which is pretty cool, and I appreciated that. Moving into kind of the specifics of everything though, one of the things we have to deal with is the fact that underside weathering is a little bit, I don't want to say unique, but it is a little bit different because we don't have quite the amount of volume of information because it's part of the aircraft we don't see quite often and or is not photographed as much. And so from that, we have to sort of play detective and maneuver ourselves in a successful way to kind of recreate a lot of the things we're dealing with. And that's what I wanted to kind of focus on today a little bit with, in terms of, you know, the power of oil paint rendering and what it's for and how to use it to your best advantage so that you guys can see success on your end. And that's a critical aspect to what I'm trying to teach with you guys in particular, is really crossing those T's and dotting those I's so that it does resonate on your side, and that you're able to extrapolate out this sort of information and you know, obviously on your projects. And I do recommend, if you are unfamiliar and you're new to this and or would like to transition to something of this nature, do what I'm doing here. In other words, I have a model that's, you know, less than, you know, 20 bucks or whatever you got on eBay, and it's again, the surface detail's fine. I built it gear up so we can kind of just bypass a lot of stuff and get right into the heart of learning this process, or in your case, or, you know, kind of from my teachings, to absorb that quickly. And so embrace that concept in terms of utilizing second models or scrap pieces, or in this case here, really low cost. You know, this is the easy kit. It's actually designed for purposes of this nature of introduction to hobby work and stuff like this. So these are perfect for that. Moving into kind of the specifics of what's going on though, is in what the heart of this video is really going to be about the rendering aspect of it. What is weathering? How do we go about weathering aircraft? You know, it's not a subject that has been broken down effectively over time in the last 15-20 years in terms of, you know, teaching this to people. This is something, it's kind of scruffed over with generic terms. In fact, we hear it all the time today of, you know, now it's oil paint weathering. And that's just overly generic in terms of what's going on. Yeah, you're weathering, you get the aircraft dirty, and we understand that, but, you know, like, what are you doing? Where are the specifics of the tasks of which you're trying to, you know, use your application? You know, the colors, what are you doing and why? And just saying oil paint weathering is too generic in my opinion. The reason I put in the term rendering is, you know, because it's not hard to extrapolate out. I could have called it oil paint weathering. That doesn't do anything for anybody. The term rendering does though, and the reason I find it very effective in terms of nomenclature, OPR, one, that's a nice, easy, an acronym, but nomenclature is important, terminology is important, because when you render something out, that comes from the background of art and illustration in terms of fully detailing out a painting or an illustration for the viewer so they have maximum amount of information. And in the 3D scope of CAD modeling and stuff of that nature that we see today, or, you know, really prevalent today, which is prevalent because we see it for 3D printing and a lot of other stuff going on today. So the rendering term is quite effective for this in terms of you're showing kind of a final variant of whatever device it is you're trying to recreate. And so the rendering term here for the weathering conversation is exactly that. You see here with the colors and the brushes, I am rendering out each little section or part or detail as I move along. And that's a critical aspect to this, because that tells you that I'm applying certain colors specific to the task and recreating those special effects individually. And then I'm layering those up to create a weathered effect, which, to give you all a foundation again, or to repeat this conversation, because it's a really important one, is weathering is a snapshot in time of the age of a vehicle. And so what you have here is, in aircraft specific terms, is you have an aircraft manufactured in California. It's been transported across to the east coast of the US during the war, and then it's put on a boat across the Atlantic. It's unloaded in the UK, and it then sees squadron service as a night fighter in the last, you know, year of the war per se, or something like that. And that's the general context of the life of this machine. And then what the weathering does as a scale modeler what you're doing is you're capturing that moment. You're selecting a period of or point in time, often by what references we have available to us, and that's the de facto research into the project, delineation part of that and how that works. But you're capturing a moment in time, and that moment in time is 3 months into the machine's life, or 3 years, or 30 years, or whatever that is for you. And that's really kind of the emphasis of what weathering is, and turning your brain into that kind of realm of putting your in the right headspace. And I think the mental aspect of this is woefully underrepresented in the hobby. I think, not to be negative, but the Me Too crowd, follow the kids at chow time to the lunch hall of just kind of same is really starting to run its course in particular, on social media and stuff, because we have this information so quickly now. People can build and snap a photo, post it immediately, and go. And so we see this happening quite frequently. And the point I'd like to emphasize here is that if you step back and you kind of look at A, B, C, and D in terms of how do I get there, how do I get to the end game of the project successfully, and what does oil paint rendering bring to this conversation, and then what does, kind of following a guideline of references and research, and then moving that along, when you get your base colors painted, you can move directly into the weathering conversation with this oil paint palette. And that'll save you a lot of time and efficiency conversation versus, spending more time than necessary, I feel, with the airbrushing stage, because the OPR stage can handle all the nuanced shading and discolorations that you're looking for in a more precise and effective manner than the airbrush. And the airbrush is excellent. Don't get me wrong. Trust me, you guys should know I use my airbrush a lot, but I also don't spend a ton of time in that kind of pre-painting stage, if you will, or pre-patina stage of pre-shading that's common today. I don't spend a lot of time there because I know when I get to this point in time, it's either going to be redundant or overkill, or it's going to push the model way too extreme out of the realm of realism, which is I'd like to at least, center myself around that conversation and then build up an artistic development out from a realistic point of view, which is kind of why when you look at the armor stuff and why I've named my books Tank Art, because it's that art side of it that I'd like to impart, but I do build upon kind of a foundation group of scenarios and material from that. To execute OPR in a simplistic conversation, again, if you've watched the other P-61 videos, and I'll link those for you guys here, and there were the Tempest video, and of course there's always the live streams, which are fun. The point of all of this is to really reinforce in content driven, formula for in what I like to call the light to dark conversation. With weathering in particular, specific, when a machine exits from day 1 until day 150 or day 3040, whatever it is, it goes through a process of gathering, discolorations, dust, dirt, grease, grime, etc. And to replicate that as a scale model builder in a one-to-one conversation of how do you do this? Light to dark. So you have your palette there. The colors on the palette relate to the colors of the model. That's a really direct correlation. We're working with a light gray underside with some white and black predominantly, and then you have a little bit of what you'll always have is kind of your grease and grime colors on your palette. Your hydraulic stain fluid colors, your greasing, all these kind of things for lubrication, the movements of the machine, and or the human weathering element that comes in, and say when an ammo panel is removed and that panel's off, and then the panels they're leaning on while they're working on it become darker and dirtier from kind of the mechanical human interaction. So all these play into it, and all these play into the weathering of an aircraft. Light to dark. You start with your lighter tones. In this case, I've added kind of a distempered patina of dust and fade into the gray paint with the lighter tone. And then what you see here is as I work through my panel lines, I produce a middle tone and then work up darker and darker and darker. I apply kind of a blend for airflow streaking. I apply some blends for both kind of a structural streaking, which is what you see here, kind of a crosshatch. Gives you a little bit of kind of a nuanced skin on frame conversation without getting into the real, riveting, of surface details. And that's important when you have machines or kits, and I should say kits specifically, that don't have that detail. And, kind of a quick way to kind of work around that. Light to dark. So if you want to fade a panel, apply some light tones up against the panel lines, blend it in effectively with the stipple blend. All this is being shown on screen repeatedly for the intended purpose of kind of, illustrating these conversations and showcasing the technique and the process. But from there, what you do is you're extrapolating out from the bristles of the brush. And why am I saying it that way? Because it's awkward to say it. You're like, wait, what? It's because when you go between an airbrush and a paintbrush, the airbrush is limited down to a certain point in size. And its softness will always kind of limit itself on top of that. Well, when you look at photos and you look at the real things, there is a natural grittiness and a natural roughness that happens from both Mother Nature and human interaction. It's not smooth airbrush look all the time, and that's effective for sure on some aircraft, and that's not arguable. What it is, though, is there's still 75 to 90% out there of machines that have a lot grittier, matte painted look that haven't been around for very long. This is a prime example. World War II is a prime example of that. They were in service for months. That kind of conversation at the most, and in the best of times for at least frontline combat aircraft. So that's kind of where my head's at. And getting in the mental game is part of what OPR brings to the table as well, because when you go through the longer airbrushing stages, even if you think you're adding patina and weathering, you're not actually. You're not into the weathering conversation yet. When you jump into OPR and then go through this in terms of a section by section conversation and solve the problems of the subject, what is the mathematical equation of this P-61 in this particular point in time, that's how you resolve weathering in terms of what's going on in that little panel line right there, what's going on this adjacent panel here, what's going along around this edge of the spoiler or the flap or the aileron or whatever that is. That's the specificity of weathering and trying to figure out what's going on. It's not just laying down a dark panel line wash and wiping it off and calling it a day. And so I know that's going to ruffle some feathers, and I'm not trying to, but I'm also trying to emphasize the fact that if you take this seriously and or want to seek the next level of where to take your weathering for your aircraft models, consider OPR, because what you have here is a lot of power and control above and beyond all the other tools in the hobby. And for those of you that have said too, well, I'm watching a master modeler at work here, that's the biggest myth and or excuse and or lie that you're going to be telling yourself in this, because what do you see on screen? It's a brush in my nice thumb, but that's it. Anybody can do this. You are all capable of doing this. And like I said in the beginning of the video, grab the low-end models, cheap models, and practice this. If you're new to this, really put the time in. It's the same as doing a corner kick. It's the same as doing a chip shot onto the green. It's the same as doing the free throw. Practice, practice, practice. There is no other answer to this. It is the only solution to getting better at scale model building. End of statement. So light to dark, got your brushes, and all those are linked in the description down below for you guys. You got the best brushes on the planet from King Art, and you have outstanding oil paints from Gamblin, but oil paints kind of are very universal, so use what you have. Lay up your palette, colors that replicate the model that you're working on, and go for there. My palette has a few more simply because I teach a bunch of different aircraft or a bunch of different armor and gunpla and stuff, so I tend to go a full color palette. But when you set yours up, you're going for the colors that you're working on, and then that's apply light to dark. And you can see here now as we're getting into kind of the upper middle ranges of the dark tones and trying to increase the storytelling aspect of everything, which again, that's weathering. It's a snapshot in time. It's a story of the life of the machine. And this is what I find so fascinating with it. To be honest with you, I love this myself. Like I can do this, and in fact, I do it all day. And I'm blessed in that. I understand that I'm lucky in that regard. But don't discount the fact that you can sit down for a half hour, for 45 minutes, because that's what the length of this full video was, about 45 minutes from the start of the boom till the end of this wingtip. And that's all that it took to do that. It's over the paint job. And the beauty of OPR, what it's doing is, why rendering is such the key term to reinforce that, it's the completeness of the task. That's what rendering is. Weathering is just weathering. Weathering is just getting stuff dirty. Rendering is the completeness of the task. So by going through the sections at a time, light to dark, I'm completing the full section and solving that math problem. And then I'm moving to the next one, and I already have a previous solution in front of me. Now it becomes even easier. And that, my friends, is really the heart of the joy of OPR and going through the process and really embracing it for your own work. So from there, we will see you on the next ones. We have some additional props coming up. We have some jets coming in the channel, and we actually have a few helos coming into the studio as well. So I don't know if I'm going to fit them through the door, but I hope you guys stick around for that, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care. Thank you. Later. Bye. See ya. Okay, I'm out. Peace.